Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 14, and my name is Janet Zabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. Today, I have an interview show. My guest is Kerry Brown, who is the owner and operator of Strong Roots Resources, which is a permaculture and edible landscaping consulting business in Tennessee. And Kerry and I first met last April when we were both at Nicole Sauce's spring workshop. And if you don't know who Nicole Sauce is, she has been producing the Living Free in Tennessee podcast, and I've been listening since almost the very beginning. It's been about 8 years now. And the fact that I have been listening that long tells you two things. First, that she produces quality content, and secondly, that she's consistent and she keeps going. A lot of podcasts start and then kind of fade out, and she's managed to keep it going for 8 years now. And not only that, she has created a community, a worldwide community of people. The tagline for her podcast is helping you to live the life you choose on your terms. And her community is full of people who are making that happen in their own lives. And Kerry and I were both at the spring workshop, and one afternoon when we had a little bit of downtime before dinner, we were sitting there visiting, and he told me about his grandmother. He calls her Nan, and about how she taught him to sew when he was a young boy. He also learned how to sew on a vintage sewing machine because Nan had a Singer 99, which Kerry now owns. And when I started the podcast, Kerry and I reconnected at Self-Reliance Festival this past October in Camden, Tennessee, and I invited him to share his story and his memories of sewing with Nan here on the podcast. So that's going to be today's episode. I hope you'll enjoy it. And Kerry, welcome to the podcast.
All right. So, hey, Janet, I'm glad we made time to do this. I haven't gotten to really talk about my grandmother too much on all the different podcasts that I've been on where we cover all kinds of topics because I'm into a million different things. But my grandmother, Aline Brown, known as Nan to us grandkids, was very much the matriarch of our family. So she would have grown up. She was born in 1931, so she's kind of a Depression era, silent generation lady, and she was one who kind of came from that mindset of we don't waste things, we make use of everything, and that meant that she made quite a bit of her own clothes, including her wedding dress. She came from a family who they were farmers, and her father was a builder, and her mom was also a seamstress and a quilter. And this was back to when you had quilting community bees, quilting competitions, and that sort of thing in the area where I live. So my Nan lived right next door to us growing up, and it was customary for me after school. I pretty much did this from about the beginning of middle school all the way through the end of high school. I would go over to her house every day after school, and I would tell her about each of my classes. We were very close. She was basically a third parent, and her husband had died. My grandfather had died before I was born. He died in 1969. So we did a lot of things together, went on vacations and whatnot. And naturally, I was kind of interested in also making things. I was always kind of into figuring out how to do stuff. So because she spent a fair amount of time down in her sewing room, I, just asked if she could teach me how to run the machine because I thought the machine was cool. So
And
I'll
about
pause there, but that's
how
kind
old
of
would you have been?
that probably started around middle school, so 11. about 11 years old, I would say, when she was she was pretty delighted to see that I wanted to learn.
Yeah. I think grandmothers always want to have willing students.
Yeah, she was very patient, um, and we had no shortage of scrap material, and she had at this point inherited stuff from her parents who had passed away in 1993. So she had the fabric and the thread for the next two apocalypse. She had plenty. So uh, she taught me how to read a pattern, how to cut out based on a pattern, and she had a million of those too. And of course, most of them were from the 60s and the 70s. So I learned how to sew bell bottoms. I learned how to do pleats and darts and things. I learned how to like take in a shirt if it was too wide, or to let it out, or to take in or let out pants, basic stuff like that. And then eventually we got into quilting as well.
Did you have any siblings, and were they interested at all or not?
Not really. I mean, I guess I have siblings. So at that time, my sister Erica, my half sister on dad's side, she was probably still living at home then because she's 7 years older than me. And I think Nan taught her a little bit as well. But I would have been real little when she was doing that. Because we all got taught piano. So it was like you get the piano first, and then if you sit so long enough for that, you might get put on the sewing machine too. Uh, but by that time it was pretty much just me and one of my cousin Katie. I believe she showed interest as well, and so Nan would show the both of us how to run the machine.
I think I would like your Nan. She sounds like my kind of woman.
She was really the coolest in a lot of ways. She was kind of ahead of her time. Being widowed when she was young, she would have just been in her early 40s when that happened. She was the kind of lady, she was like, well, it's not to say she didn't experience grief, because I'm sure she did, but I think she pretty much, being from that tough generation of going through wars and depression and everything, was like, well, I can't come apart. I have to pull it together and take care of my children. Of course, she was both of her parents were still around then, and they lived nearby. So to her, um, most things were just you just figured out how to do it. You didn't. It's Which is kind of funny because I say that, but she was also like a class A worrier, and I have also picked up that trait of worrying. But she also knew how to solve problems.
So describe her sewing space. You said it was in the basement.
Yep. So she has and it's the house where my brother lives now. So this is just right downhill from where our cabin is. Has a full basement, with like one side is finished and the other side it's basically all finished. It's all concrete and block and everything. And on the laundry room side, she turned about 25% of that into a uh, a sewing table, and she had a stool, and the machine was the portable Singer 99. So she had like this cutout that she could drop it in there so that it was flush with the table. Various cabinets, and what I remember the most is that she had all these cork boards all over the place, and she just had different little patches or just things over the years that it might have been hanging on that wall for 40 years, some little odd and end. And I just kind of remember, I would ask her like, where did that come from? It would be like maybe a little souvenir from a beach trip or something, and or things that her kids would have made. She still had the posters and the collages that my dad and my uncle made down there. So it was like a time capsule going down there. So it was a soothing space. Plus, it was a great place to be in August because it was thermoregulated down there, and so it made a lot of sense to go down there in the heat of the day in the summertime when I was out of school and work on sewing projects, and it be an opportunity to tell stories and kind of just be surrounded by this physical family history that we have.
You said you started with clothing first. Was it her idea or your idea to move to quilts?
I think I brought it up. I'm not real sure what inspired it, other than knowing that my great grandmother had done that as well. Actually, great grandmothers on both sides of my family. We still have quilts from both sides. I think I remember just like wanting a wintertime project, and I was really into the way things used to be done. I'm into history and tradition, and Nan would tell stories of like her mother and other women in the community hanging out in the big kind of living room where she grew up with the wood stove going and a whole bunch of women sitting around quilting and telling stories and probably telling community gossip and all that kind of stuff. So I think I just wanted, instinctually, I wanted a link to that part of my past.
So do you remember the first quilt you made?
I made a bunch of little like lap quilts that would
Okay.
have been about, um, they were about 3 by 5 feet, if I recall. Or actually, well, it probably would have been something more like we would have done it in yards. So it would have been something that made sense, to not waste material. So somewhere around in there. And maybe 1 yard by 2 yards, something like that. And I made a whole bunch of them for like pretty much everybody in the family for one Christmas, probably around, I feel like I was in middle school when I did that. So 95, 96, somewhere around in there. And with the exception of probably the batting and the some of the backing, I would imagine it all came from scrap stuff that she had already there. So I just went through all the scrap material that was set aside for any old project and gathered all kinds of different, very 70s patterns in a lot of the cases. I've always right. I like really bright, colorful things, and so um, I'm. I think I made at least 6 or 7. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah, just knocked out. Like once I got the hang of the first one, we just knocked them out.
And do you still have any or they've all disappeared?
I think they're all still around. I know I see the one. Mom has a couple that she keeps on rocking chairs in the house. Um, I gave some to family members who live far away, so I haven't seen those. And then I still have the big one that I made for my bed. So I made one that was, even though of course I had a twin bed at the time, I made one that was a little closer to a full size, and I've still got that one.
So did you machine quilt these or did you hand quilt them?
We did the actual quilting by hand.
Okay.
We sewed the squares together, and I just did squares. I didn't go fancy. I'm not in. I mean, I'm sure I could do the patterns, but I wasn't that skilled at that point. Nor was I probably patient enough. But yeah, we sewed together the squares, um, and we I think we hand stitched. I know we hand stitched the quilting, and I think we hand stitched the border, which I'm probably forgetting the accurate term for that, but the edging
Oh, the
basically.
binding? Yeah.
The binding. Yeah, I think we did that by hand as well on all of them.
Yeah, I like to do my bindings by hand. I like slow sewing. Does that make sense?
Yes. In fact, like speaking of slow sewing, we there weren't too many rules about using the machine, except rule number one was don't go too fast. She was like, it's not a race car. She'd had this machine since about 1953. And, uh, she was obviously trying to get as much mileage out of it as possible. So I wasn't supposed to go too fast. She was like, "Don't." She'd say, "Don't mash that gas pedal too much. You don't need to go that fast. Plus, that's how you run over your finger. You know." So that was one of the rules of like, just yeah, take it easy. Watch what you're doing so your line doesn't start waving around. But yeah, I mean, there's something about sitting in a comfy chair, working on your binding or whatever. You're not at a machine with this giant bulky thing catching, and you've doubled it over. You don't realize it until you've run 3 feet, of stitching, and you're taking all that out. So yeah,
Yeah, I'm getting ready to bind a king size quilt and I expect it'll take me about 2 weeks. Yeah, I don't know what it is about little boys and especially boys and big boys who like to find out how fast the sewing machine will go.
guilty. Yeah, yeah.
So you said it was a Singer 99.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, and you
Yeah,
still have it, don't you?
I do still have it.
Do
Yep,
you
we
still
talked
sew
about
on
it
it?
at the yeah, yeah, we I do a little bit. It really needs some service. Um the of course over time, like it really needs a new belt. The belt is getting dry rotted. I'm sure the motor could use, the lubrication points kind of hit up on it. And but yeah, I mean it runs the tensioner has gotten very finicky. It Man had the magic touch for that tensioner. And she passed away 10 years ago, and anytime I pull it out, me and that tensioner have troubles. So I'm considering, taking it over. We do have a Singer maintenance place here in town, and I'm considering taking it over to them. And I guess there's a spring in there. Some people say that the spring can wear out,
Hmm.
and it's probably backing off the spring, and things are getting a little crazy with the stitching on the underside will get bound up.
So do you have another machine that you sew on? Are you still sewing?
I will a little bit. I actually do more hand sewing these days. I'll repair my own stuff. I'll patch my own stuff. Occasionally, I will let out or more likely take in. It's very hard for me to find button up shirts that fit right. So if I can get it close enough, I'll take the stitching out and I'll hand stitch it. I'll pull it in a little bit. Um, and my wife got I'm not sure exactly the model, but it's a brother machine a couple of years ago because she wanted to get back into it. So we have a modern machine. It's not an electronic one. It's still pretty like basic. So not a bunch of weird uh, computer settings to fool with. Still pretty straightforward. So yeah, we've got that, and I imagine if I'm gonna get back into it, um, big time, I'll probably use the newer machine a little bit more just because I love vintage stuff. You just want something done, and you don't want to the tensioner and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I know my vintage machines don't handle some of the newer fabrics, like the performance knits and things like that. They just don't handle them as well.
Yeah, yeah. I remember Nan always saying she did these. I can't remember if it was probably satin. These satin bridesmaid dresses for I think it was my uncle's wedding, so her youngest son, and she was like never again. She was chasing that fabric all over the place, and she was trying to rig up. Um, she basically rigged up some kind of frame to help she could hold the fabric as she was passing it through the machine because of the way it would just slip and slide all over the place. So, um, but yeah, she sewed. Everybody got luau outfits one year, shirt and shorts. I remember having a luau themed party at her house. She did multiple, formal dresses, including her own. She and her mother did her own wedding dress. Um, a lot of times we got man sewed us clothes for Christmas. We get clothes or get sometimes like blankets and throws and things like that, just real simple stuff.
It's interesting to me that I mean we're both involved in kind of a self-sufficiency type of lifestyle, and it's interesting to me that some of the textile arts get overlooked a little bit. And I like to joke that, nobody wants to see you naked after the apocalypse.
I don't want to be naked in the apocalypse. That's for sure. That is a really good point, and I don't think it's. I think it's absolutely valid. I mean, I think about how much money I have saved myself and trouble I have saved myself by just being able to fix clothes. Um, I'm a weird size. I can never really find stuff that fits all that well. I've got a very short inseam, so a lot of times if I get pants, the leg length will be okay, but the inseam will be either too much, and it's down there mid thigh, and you can't bend over, or it's the opposite, and it's remarkably uncomfortable. So being able to adjust, especially to make an inseam too long to make that shorter, is relatively easy. And I mean, you give me a seam ripper, and I'm going to make stuff better because because I also dislike clothes shopping. So if I can get pretty close by buying something and then just repairing it, um, or even I haven't really made my own clothes since I was a little kid, but just being able to repair stuff, even just knowing a few different ways, a few different types of stitches to hold something together that's constantly under tension, like the inseam of a pant or something like that. It's important. Um, the for the quality of clothes that comes across, your basic stores, your basic department stores these days is they're terrible. I wear stuff out very fast, so I've learned real quick. It just makes sense to I'm gonna go ahead and throw patches in the knees. I'm gonna patch like the inner thigh. I'm gonna reinforce the seat of my pants. Um, when I got my first EMS uniforms, uh, and Nam was still alive then, and I took them over to her because you just get the closest size that they have available. It's never very good, and we fixed the inseam and we fixed the cuffs because they were way too long and they were baggy and everything. And we cut the waistband and added a little bit of elastic on each side, which made a world of difference for all the bending and everything that we do. And this is way before the whole tactical clothing thing had really taken off. That didn't take off for a couple more years. So we basically took very basic duty pants and turned them into what 511 and all those other guys started doing, about a decade later. I guess the clothes are out there, but the public wasn't buying them. Only people who were in the military or police were really buying them. So um, I was like, yeah, I did that ages ago because I realized I'm gonna blow out the seat with all the squatting we do. I'm gonna blow out the knees, and I'm gonna slide in and out of this truck 100 times a day, and I'm gonna wear my like my pockets out. I'm gonna wear out we switched them from I can't really think of the technical term, but instead of just like patch pockets that you have on a pair of jeans, that's what they came with, which those are gonna rip. um, we inverted them so they were more of like an inner pocket inside. Yeah, so just little things like that made a big difference.
I'm forever repairing my husband's clothing, and right now on my kitchen table is a gigantic, it's probably 4 feet long by about 2.5 feet wide. It's a carrying case for one of his concrete saws.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought it in and he said, I need a special hole in the end of this bag. Can you do that for me?
Cool.
So yeah, that's going to be this weekend's project. It's part of why I bought an industrial sewing machine, because he's always bringing me these interesting projects.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like what John Willis does. He gets feedback from all these kind of people, and they build this really incredible equipment, all this nylon equipment off of just kind of like an idea of like, what if we shifted this way, added a little bit of length here or whatever. Like I've been kicking around. Uh, I would like a foraging bag. I have not found anything commercially that suits what I would like to do. And so I've just kind of been making notes off to the side. And like next time I'm out there in Camden, I'm going to talk to John and be like, I got an idea. Like, you want to do it? You want to do the strong roots, foraging bag,
That's
or
brilliant.
or he might be like, man, not really. I might come home and make it myself. So, uh,
Well, if he
yeah,
doesn't
like I
want to
want.
do it, I I
There we
I'd
go.
take a stab at it.
All right. Yeah, like I just want something like I kind of want it like a satchel, not, but I want it a little bit lower than most of them hit. Like I want it to kind of hit like the top of my upper thigh, and I would like the opening to be relatively large because I'm thinking I've got like it's usually a bundle of something that I'm stuffing down in there, and I would actually like the opening to be semi rigid so that it's not rolling up on itself when I'm trying to put stuff in it. And then maybe like a couple little organizer pockets, maybe on the outside, maybe like on the inside, like closer to the body. I'm just kind of messing around with it because I've been I've been using like whatever I have on hand. Most of the time I just run around with a bucket. When I'm doing this at home, whether I'm doing it, this could work for the garden, this can work for when I'm out in the woods. And but it's like there's always about 4 tools that I want to have with me. So I'd like to have little slots for those. And then the ability to either zip it closed or some kind of buckle and close, something like that that will close. So like rigid but not too rigid opening. That might take off. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
I know a lot of people who like to run around the woods and pick stuff up. So
Right. So, have you ever seen that movie, The Book of Eli?
I don't think so.
It, if you have a chance sometime, watch it. I think it's Samuel L. Jackson who's in it, and he says at one point, it's a post-apocalyptic type of movie.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one point in the movie where he says, we kill people now for things we used to throw away.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking about that kind of in getting back to your grandmother. You said, she kept everything.
Mm-hmm.
And scrap, you make quilts out of scraps. You don't go to the store and buy lots of brand new fabric.
Yeah. Yeah. She hardly ever bought fabric unless it was for something that was incredibly specific. Um, we had these for folks who don't know, feed bags. These days, when you go to Rural King or Tractor Supply and get your feed, it's in like this whatever these bags are made out of.
Oh,
Um,
like the
but
polypropylene type stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they're kind of kind of be a little bit water resistant. Well, back in the day, they were fabric cotton bags, and they were printed. They had patterns on them, and I want to say it was usually about 2 yards of material. It seemed like that made up the bag, and so the men would go get the feed. When they would empty the bag goes to the lady of the household, and she would save them. And ones that were that hadn't gotten all torn up or whatever in the barn, that became fabric. So that's what actually we made a lot of those quilts and those little lap quilts out of, were feed bags. She had about four big containers, big Rubbermaid containers of those. And I still have one. I have whittled it down to one, but I still have one. And the fabric has held up. They're all just all kinds of prints and patterns. Very very 60s, very 50s and 60s. But like I said, I'm kind of into that. But when she first started teaching me to sew, I made a bunch of shorts, just very basic, kind of knee length shorts from feed bags. Learned how to make the pockets and everything. And I wore those. I wore them to school in the era where you were most definitely judged by your clothing. I was already the weird kid, so I just kind of figured, what the heck, this is, this can't get
Embrace
any
it.
worse. Exactly, exactly. um, I tell you what, nobody else. I remember that was a time where like a girl would be mortified if another girl came to school wearing the same thing she was. And I was like, well, there's no way anybody is matching. No dude's walking in wearing this exact same pair of shorts. So um, that was something I had a bunch. I mean, I had probably 10 or 12 pair, and I
Wow.
just wore them out. And they were, when they were a little too worn out for school, they became, running around in the woods clothes. So
Cool. So what's next? You said you probably will get the machine serviced.
yeah, I am going to get the machine serviced. As since we're going in the wintertime here, that means I tend to spend a little more time inside. I don't really have any more patterns. Not that patterns are very easy to come by these days online. They're pretty inexpensive. I'm probably most likely to pick up another round of quilt making, probably because that's something Angel and I can do together. They're easy to learn. It's fun to sit there and work on them together. Uh, one battle I do have is carpal tunnel, so that kind of that can be a little rough when it comes to quilting, but it's been getting better. I've gotten some treatment for it, and I've been seeing the chiropractor, and it is definitely better. So I'm hopeful that means I can have some of my dexterity back, because that's something that I've really struggled with for a few years. Um, so that's kind of where I'm leaning on that. Just maybe pick up a couple of little projects. Um, just keep it fresh in my brain, and then another thing I may do is I'm looking down here where I've got this thing stored. I think it's in a different box, but I've got, when we went through Nan's estate, I found like all of these attachments, and I'm not even sure if all of them match this exact machine, but there are like three different kinds of button holders. There's all these different feet. So I may end up taking pictures of this stuff, and you're going to get an email like, Janet, I'm not looking at. And they're all like they're all still like in their original box. Some of them have instructions, so that'll be helpful too. So I'm trying to see, because Nan had so much stuff from her mother's place, and then like a couple of community members who had sewing machines, she wound up with their stuff. So it's like I don't even know what goes with what. But it was my understanding that the Singer 99 was kind of considered like a pretty versatile machine, and it had some extras that came with it.
Yeah,
So
you should have at least a few attachments to go with it. So I think you could probably, there may even be a ruffler. You could put ruffles on things.
that is exactly, you know what, 2024 needs some ruffles. I'll be the one to do it.
All
So
right.
yeah.
Well, that's cool. I think we're going to wrap it up. Thanks so
Right.
much for giving me some of your time today. I really appreciate it.
I
And it's
enjoyed it. You're welcome.
wonderful to hear about your Nan.
Yeah, she was the coolest.
I bet you miss her.
I do, but I'm glad I have as much physical history around to remind me of her, and kind of I like to ask myself, some people ask, what would Jesus do? I kind of think about, what would Nan do and act in a way that would make her proud, and or even make her laugh or roll her eyes, but definitely kind of keep her in my mind as that influence and support that she always was.
Oh, that's awesome. So you are the owner of Strong Roots Resources, and
Yep.
I'm sure that I have some listeners who would be interested in that part of your life. So do you want to talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure. So I started Strong Roots Resources in 2019, which has evolved into a property evaluation and edible landscape design business. So, whereas your landscapers will go over to a place and they will suggest all of these ornamentals and maybe non-native things for your landscape, I actually help people create landscapes for food production, and I scale that anywhere from small urban systems where I began, up to multiple acres in terms of full-blown homesteads with ruminants and birds and really all the animals that you could ask for. And I do that from a permaculture perspective, which is a way of mimicking natural systems. That is a way of what we call closed loop systems, to where we're always mindful of, we're not really exporting things. We are keeping everything on the property, or we're keeping water on the property. We're keeping fertile soil. We're building fertility. So I do that as a full-time business at this point, whether it's design and consulting and property visits, whether it's small installations, or not necessarily small, but installations here locally. So if folks are interested in that, they can go over to the website strongrootsresources.com, or email me at strongrootsresources@gmail.com, and I'm always happy to converse or have a phone chat and see if my services are a good fit for what they've got in mind.
Cool. I'm hoping at some point you might come out to Paul Wheaton's, and then you'll be in my neighborhood.
That is a ways away, but I won't rule it. I've wanted to see. I've never been out there, never been that far, but I would like to see what that end of Montana looks like, because I'm sure it's beautiful and vastly different than what I'm accustomed to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks again, and I hope I run into you. I might get back to Tennessee at some point. We'll have to see. So
Awesome. You're welcome,
right.
and we'll be glad to have you anytime.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate Kerry sharing his story, and as I told him in the podcast, I think I would have enjoyed getting to know his Nan. She sounds like quite a woman. We're getting close to the end of 2023. I have been sewing. I did a very interesting project over the weekend. My husband, who owns a construction company, has a lot of concrete cutting equipment because in addition to pouring concrete foundations, he also does a fair bit of concrete cutting for egress windows and things like that. And he recently bought a new hydraulic saw, concrete saw, and it came with a storage bag, a carrying bag, but the bag was too small for the saw. It was too short. The saw is probably, I don't know, almost 4 feet long, and the bag wasn't quite long enough to enclose the blade. So he asked me if I could sew an opening into the end of the bag. If it were up to him, he probably would have just slashed an opening in the end of the bag, but the bag is made of cordura, a couple of layers of a nylon cordura, and if he had done that, it probably would have frayed. So I looked at the bag for a couple of days and thought about what I wanted to do, and in the end, I decided, because I've got some bag making experience and I know how to make welt openings for zippers and things like that, I decided to basically make a welt opening in the end of this bag. So on Saturday morning, I had him help me because he's much better with spatial things than I am. And he can rotate things in his head. And I figured if there were going to be any mistakes made, I would rather that he did it. So the two of us kind of looked at the bag and talked through what we needed to do. The opening of the bag, the top opening, had a zipper and it had steel frame elements on either side. If you have done any bag making and you've ever made a Poppins bag, it was similar to the construction of the Poppins bag where there's a channel at the top of the bag and you slide steel frame pieces into it to keep the bag open. And in order for me to get the bag underneath the foot of my Juki 1541 industrial sewing machine, I had to open up the binding over those steel pieces and slide them out. So that was the first thing that we did. And then I turned the bag inside out and I pinned a piece of cordura over the place where we thought the opening should go. And then we took the bag out to the shop where I have my sewing machine. And he had to support the bag over my head because it was big enough and heavy enough that I couldn't sew it without somebody holding it up. So he did that with one hand and held a flashlight for me with the other hand because even though I do have lights in my shop, I had to take the light from the sewing machine off in order to get the bag under the machine. So with all of that wrangling, we did manage to sew the piece of cordura to the inside of the bag. And then what I did was I cut an opening through the piece of cordura that I sewed onto it and through the bag and pulled the piece of cordura through. And then I top stitched around the opening so that it would hold the piece of cordura that I had added and bind the edges of the opening so that they wouldn't fray. If you want to see pictures, there are pictures and a description on my blog at janetzabo.com, so you can go there and read the blog post that talks about that. It was an interesting project. He's always bringing me those kinds of things to do, which is why I have an industrial sewing machine. And over Christmas break, I have promised to make him a couple of generator covers. So I ordered 8 yards of cordura from Seattle Fabrics a couple of weeks ago, and that's what I'll be doing. I don't think that I'm going to try to do podcasts for the last 2 weeks of the year. This seems like a good podcast episode to end 2023 on. I'm going to take a couple of weeks, get myself organized, plan for 2024, and you can expect another podcast episode right at the beginning of 2024. So in the meantime, I wish you a very happy holiday season, a happy new year, and I hope you get to go sew something.